Hey, what's going on, YouTubers? How are ya? Hiker Dave here. I hope everyone's doing well. I apologize again about the van video. I'm losing light, and I had to work today on a Sunday. I very rarely work on a Sunday, but I couldn't say no to it. But I wanted to take this time to talk about something I've really been wanting to bring up for a while. I just haven't had the chance. I had to do a lot of homework on this story, and it's simple as YouTube documentaries and stuff. It's about the Dyatlov Pass incident. Wicked, very strange. There's been so many things and theories about this story that are extremely interesting. What exactly happened to these 9 cross-country skiers, students in Russia? So let me jump right into it, so as to not waste any valuable time, because we all know our time is valuable. Whoop, wrong book. So, the Dyatlov Pass, or Dyatlov Pass, I'm not positive how to pronounce it, but I did a lot of this I got from a channel I am now really enjoying, Bob Gimlin. And I watched this video, really great video, about 15 minutes, and got most of my info from that. But I watched, previously to this, I've watched a bunch of documentaries on this, and there's some crazy theories on what people think might have happened here. But let's go through a little quick synopsis of, or some bullet points of exactly what's going on for those of you who may have never heard of this story. The name of the Bob Gimlin video is called Bigfoot Kills 9 cross-country skiers in the Ural Mountains. So there were 2 women and 7 men that set off on this long trek, and they went missing. It was January 27th when they began their trek, and on February 2nd, by that point, they were all dead. So search and rescue took them about the same amount of time to find them as it did for these 9 cross-country students to get to where they all passed. And so 6 days later, they found the bodies. And here's the really strange stuff. So they found their camp area. Their tent was slashed on 3 sides from the inside out after they had done some looking through exactly what's going on here, and had discovered that the slashes were from the inside out. It's questionable on exactly why that would be. I don't know about if it's to crawl out, to get out, or for a vantage point to be able to see outside the tent. I think that's probably more feasible. Inside the tent, and the tent was an absolute mess. It was trashed. Inside the tent, there were no bodies, but they found jackets and a bunch of gear, boots and gloves and things like this, right? So the tent was at least or close to a half a mile from a tree line, and it was set up on a hill. Not a good spot to set up camp. These students would have known better than to set up in such a crappy area like this, with wind and rain and snow able to just be hitting you from all sides, when they could have set up in the tree line, which is where their trail where they were going would have taken them through this forested area, not out into the open like this. So apparently they had veered off course and out of the forest and perched themselves on top of this hill. Again, not a good spot. And as well as no fuel around them to get a fire going or anything like that. They did have a stove in their tent, which is actually a little more confusing to me. They had access to heat and plenty of it, but the fuel would have been very hard to come by, being out in an open area on a hilltop, almost a half a mile from really your fuel. So why did they not set up the camp in the woods? What drove them out of the woods, really, is a question that Bob Gimlin talks about in this video. Something someone or something drove them out of the woods. And these, being a cross-country team, would know a lot about surviving in harsh conditions like this. 15 below zero was the weather at this time, and to not have that shelter of a tent with that nice stove to keep everybody nice and warm, it really raises more questions than answers, that is for sure. So upon they found 2 male bodies, a third of a mile from the tent next to a spruce tree. And he mentions that it was odd because their bodies were placed next to each other, which would be odd to be that close to each other like that. Or maybe it's not that odd. They might have been close to each other for warmth, but still it was an odd way to if you're dying of hypothermia. And I mean, who knows? I wouldn't know anything. I'm not a professional on hypothermia or the reactions from it. I know very little about it. I do know you make bad choices and stuff like that when you're freezing to death, but strange that these bodies were just like laid, almost placed right next to each other. The party of the skiers had a little fire near this spruce tree, apparently. It wasn't quite at the tree line. It was a distance from the tree line, but near this spruce tree. So for them to get any kind of heat from this fire that they had built next to this spruce tree, still fairly out in the open, getting any kind of heat from that fire would have been very difficult. I mean, you know, if you can imagine, if you've ever had a fire on a cold, really cold night, you'll notice people or friends or yourself, you're almost right on top of that fire because you just want nothing more to get that heat. But when you're out in the open like that, the elements just steal the heat, and you're not getting really what you need. So, again, fuel would have been hard to come by, and both men at one point had climbed the spruce tree that they were found next to, and broken or cut many of the branches. So between the men found at the spruce tree and the tent, they found 3 more members of the party, 2 males and 1 female. And they were staggered about 350 feet apart. The bodies were in a straight line towards the tent. So it wasn't like they didn't know where the tent was or they were lost. They knew where the tent was. Most likely, they were with the other 2 men at the spruce tree and attempted to return to the tent. Possibly, they waited too long, not getting enough warmth from the tent. Three of them they possibly decided, let's try to make it back to the tent. That's where the stove is. That's where there's more gear. There's boots, gloves, and jackets and stuff like that. That maybe possibly that these 3 skiers tried to make an attempt to get back to the tent and possibly, you know, died of hypothermia before they could even get there. Again, with 15 below zero, it takes 30 to 45 minutes, and that's all she wrote at that point. So 2 months later, they found the rest of the skiers. 4 more victims, 3 males and a female. They were about 250 feet away, just into the tree line, and they dug out a shelter into a huge snowbank. Not a horrible idea at all. Snow is actually a little bit of an insulator, and they also found spruce branches on the floor of this kind of igloo-type shelter that they had dug into the snowbank. Now these skiers were the most torn up out of all of the victims that were found, and you know, and again, the questions that go through my mind are, what happened to these poor people? Why didn't they go back to the tent? Why did they leave the forest? It's really, it drives me nuts thinking about what possibly would cause someone to choose hypothermia and not go where the safety is of shelter. In this little snow shelter, there were injuries to the face, feet, and hands of these victims. They were shoeless and gloveless. So they were digging. They dug out this snow shelter and were climbing these spruce trees, maybe to get a vantage point, to get a look at what was going on around them, or merely just to grab fuel for the fire. But they were doing all of this with no gloves and no boots. What in the heck drove them out of that tent to cause them to leave that stuff behind? That is a frightening thought, you know, to try to think of something that frightening that you would. Bob Gimlin actually mentions in this video, to rather choose the known against the unknown, where at least you know about the cold, where the unknown that could have been at that tent, that scared these people out of the tent, that fear of the unknown can be sometimes more overwhelming when at least you have some knowledge of cold weather and you would choose that. So, you know, what happened is the question of the day. Did something wake them in their tent? This was Bob Gimlin brought up these questions, and I think they're fantastic. What woke them in the tent? Something drove them from the trail in the first place out of the woods. And then they also kept journals every day except for this last day. And it begs to question, what were they doing that day and later into that night that caused them to not make their daily entry into a journal that was kept every day except for this day? Again, puzzling. They fled the tent and they looked for shelter at the tree line. And something obviously kept them from returning to the tent. I apologize for repeating myself. So they did keep the fire going next to the spruce tree, possibly waiting for daylight. That's my opinion. Afraid to return to whatever was at the tent. After the two men died, this is possibly what Bob Gimlin was saying, his possible theory. After the two men died, 7 left. After the 7 died, there were 7 left. 3 of them made a break for the tent, and the other refused to go back for some unknown reason. They didn't want to go back to the tent and decided to make a shelter in the tree line. All 9 had serious reason not to go back to the tent. What is the reason for that? Awesome question. One of the females in the snow shelter had her tongue removed, almost in a surgical-like manner, and a missing hand. So, in one of the documentaries, I also had heard that the hiker with her tongue missing and her hand missing, there was a slight thaw or something like that, and water was running through over her head and over her hand, and apparently she had her hand holding her head. The possibility is that her head and her hands thawed, and some woodland creatures possibly took advantage of that thaw to eat her tongue, possibly remove her hand. You know, just saying. That's a possibility. Whoa, I almost poked my eye out. There were other injuries to some of the other skiers, which include broken ribs, fractures, various dislocations. These people fought for their lives in freezing cold temperatures that, of course, would cause them to not even realize their injuries. But, you know, you're freezing to death. You could dislocate a shoulder, and you're so cold, so numb because of the elements that you wouldn't even feel it. Break a couple ribs falling out of that tree. You wouldn't even really realize it just because of the all-around pain you're already in from freezing to death. Crazy story. There's been numerous documentaries on this subject. There was a quote that Bob Gimlin had put on his screen, and I liked it, and I wrote it down. Quote, "A compelling force broke their bodies and killed them." I like that. That's interesting. So, Again, the big question, why leave the woods? Why leave the relative safety of the forest? And then who forced them back into the woods once they left the woods? And never returned for their gloves, boots, jackets, and they were not lost. These skiers weren't lost. They knew the terrain, so it's not like they were walking in circles and didn't know what was going on. They set up their tent in the open, possibly, again, I think, in my opinion, as well as Bob Gimlin's. I'm with him, so they could observe from all sides, which is possibly why the tent was cut from the inside to look around, to get a good look at what's going on around you. Another theory, avalanche. I think not. I think not, because why travel a third of a mile away and then you realize there's no avalanche, and why would you not go right directly back to the tent? So that's right out the window with the avalanche theory. Fire is another one, that the tent, that possibly a fire inside the tent because of the wood stove. There was no evidence of anything that was burnt. So again, that one gets tossed right out with the trash, in my opinion, of course. The government, the KGB, they got a little too close to maybe a government experiment. And I just don't see a reaction the way that these 9 skiers or hikers, whatever you want to call them, reacted to this situation that would cause them to choose death in the snow and freezing to death over finding out what's going on with other humans in the area. And then the injuries, again, the injuries to their bodies. I'm not sure if that all adds up. Not necessarily out the window, the KGB. I'm not throwing that away with the trash. It's a possibility. A bear. Okay. A bear actually makes more sense than most. A bear, very territorial. A bear could have been stalking them in the tent. They decided to cut the tent to see where the bear is. The bear might have jumped on the tent. They all fled. They stayed out off into the wood line or near the spruce tree, climbed the spruce tree to keep an eye on their area where the tent was to see if the bear leaves or not. But that kind of gets flushed a little bit because of they had food and provisions inside the tent that weren't touched. And same thing with the KGB thing. There were valuables, cameras, stuff like that in the tent that weren't touched. Money as well, that there was money found. I think if there was human involvement here, those valuables would have been taken. So you're left here, as Mr. Bob Gimlin says, primate. Primates are also very territorial and can be very violent. It could maybe explain the broken ribs and the dislocations and things like that. So tell me what you think, guys. I'm curious. If you haven't heard of this, all you got to do is go to the Google machine or go to YouTube and put in Dyatlov Pass. It's that easy, and you can watch hours of documentary on this. I really do believe most of you guys have seen a documentary at one time or another on this whole thing. So I would appreciate some comments. Let me know what you guys think on this whole thing. And that's it. Thank you so much, guys, for clicking. And as far as the audio goes, I got about 2 hours into my 24-hour audio. And sitting there, I actually initially said, oh, I'll skip through, I'll skip. You can't skip. I realized you can't skip because one hoot or a growl or a wood knock or something. I am getting activity near it. I can hear something walking around. But I will say the leaves are all dead and dried up on the ground. Even though we've had rain and stuff, there's still a leaf could fall next to the recorder and it sounds like something tapped the recorder. A squirrel could be walking around. A heavy bug could be walking on top of the leaves and it would come over on the recorder. So far, I'm 2 hours in, and at this 2 hour mark, the sun should be down by now. I have yet to hear any audio from sundown, so I'm interested to see. I am only 75 feet from the trail, so I hear stuff around the recording, but it's still daylight, and it is an area that people hike. So I'm interested to get into the darkness and nighttime. And again, I appreciate you guys coming by. And without a doubt, I'll see you guys on the next one.